Check mic, check mic. Okay. Alright.
Bounds.
Okay. We're new to YouTube and our channel name is 4 o'clock. We will be doing reactions, videos, challenges, lifestyle videos, basically anything.
Today we're gonna do a reaction video to Kendall Ray's Martin Luther King Jr. conspiracy theories. It says you will be shook.
Oh, shoot. Well, let's get into it.
Today we are going to be talking about the assassination of Martin Luther King. And did you know that in a real civil trial with jurors and everything, a real U.S. trial, a full jury came to the conclusion that Martin Luther King was killed in a conspiracy involving the United States. And
what
that
the
is
fuck?
completely factual.
I mean, I believe it.
But how come we don't hear about that?
What do you mean? Because the government had... Never mind.
Well, let's go ahead and look into this whole theory. So if you didn't know who Martin Luther King Jr. was, hopefully you do.
Yikes.
Yeah, some people, yeah.
You think?
Well, that's cool. What they were teaching us, come on.
There's no way.
He was a role model for thousands and thousands of Americans. His most famous speech, which I'm sure most of you know, was his I Have a Dream speech, which was given in 1963.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal.
People love Martin Luther King, and I think so many people look up to him, and the idea that he could have been murdered in a conspiracy really scares people because they can't fathom how that could possibly be true. And for a while, I was in that category of just, nothing like that could possibly be true. It's outrageous, and who could possibly think that? But if you open your mind and look at it in an unbiased way and just look at the facts, I'm sure you're gonna come to the same.
It's like our country's a bunch of crazies.
Oh, right now we're out of control right now.
He shot on April 4th of 1968. So there's 5 years between that and the time of his death. There's a lot about those 5 years that people just don't know. Very much off the radar. The media really started turning on him eventually. People from his communities, his supporters started to turn on him. And he wasn't getting nearly the momentum or the crowd that he once had gotten because of rumors. To me, it seems like a lot of the accusations made against him were attempts to foil his reputation.
The liberal media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, Time Magazine, the liberal media turns on him, and then white America turns on him very quickly. The last poll in his life, the Harris poll, found that 75%, nearly 3/4 of the American people, thought Dr. King was irrelevant in the last year of his life. Almost 60% of his own people, 60% of black folk thought he was irrelevant and persona non grata.
And it's interesting, Martin Luther King in America is definitely known as a civil rights leader who died fighting for what he believed, and some, nutcase who was racist decided to kill him. But in other parts of the world, he was really known as a revolutionary, that he stood up against the government and corruption. He's known very differently around the world than he is here. And Martin Luther King, he had an insanely huge following, like huge for just a regular guy. He was an activist, he was a voice, but he wasn't a politician, he didn't have a certain role, he wasn't a president, and he had numbers that presidents were bringing out, if not more. He had so many supporters that it became
one of the best public speakers,
man, I've ever seen. With all this power and all this influence and people who just want to hear him. And if you think about it, nowadays there's really not someone like Martin Luther King who's just a voice that we all follow, or someone who holds massive rallies and, events, considered the biggest leader in any certain category. Like, anyone like that is a lot smaller scale now. And people wonder, why is there no one that replaced that void that Martin Luther King left? Martin Luther King was seen as very threatening to the government. But it didn't really start getting bad until Martin Luther King started talking about American violence and the violence that our own government puts out into the world. He started speaking against war and money and corruption and poverty. He started questioning the amount of money we were spending on war. And he started talking about that, making people question how much of their tax dollars is going to war. And the US government is a war machine. Like, they make money off of war. It's a proven business. If you don't believe me, you should look more into it. Do your own research, because the amount of money we make off of war is staggering.
King is saying to President Johnson that you called for a war on poverty, but now you're engaged on a war in Vietnam, and King couldn't juxtapose those two realities. And so he comes out against the war in Vietnam, and Lyndon Johnson and the White House obviously turned against him.
Well, Martin Luther King started really pushing the boundaries and spreading the truth, and he wasn't an issue when he was talking about race. You know, the race issues in this country were on their way to changing, like that. It was fine that he was talking about that. It was him talking about the corruption in the government. And when he started doing this, the liberal media turned on him. Everyone turned on him, and like I said, he lost all of these supporters because of these rumors that started coming out and stuff. And no one really knows this because no one's bothered to look past what they've been told in their American history books.
I mean, King was basically being told by white America, we've given you license, Negro, to talk about civil rights, but we've not asked your opinion on foreign policy. We've not asked your opinion on how to spend federal budget dollars. And King moved outside of that lane of just talking about civil rights. But King is saying to Lyndon Johnson on the war question that war is the enemy of the poor, that the bombs you're dropping in Vietnam are landing in the ghettos and barrios of America's cities. And the money that we're wasting in Vietnam ought to be spent to eradicate poverty here at home.
He was blackmailed, basically. He was blackmailed with all types of stuff, audio recordings that they said was him, proof of he was having an affair. He became a giant target of the FBI. And it is proof now, we have proof the FBI admitted to wiretapping him. It was actually after his I Gave a Dream speech that he first was put on.
How Malcolm X was the more radical, like, obviously version in civil rights movement, but
yeah,
and that's all you hear is that Malcolm X was radical and that Martin Luther King was like all about nonviolence, but
yeah,
like this is talking about more, not that he wanted violence, but like this doesn't seem like the peaceful protester. Like this, I feel like this is more showing a different side that, like, I feel like they wanted it to seem like he was just the peaceful.
Yeah.
On FBI watch. This is a real quote from the FBI domestic intelligence chief. His name was William Sullivan, and he said this in a memo 2 days after his I Gave a Dream speech. We must mark him now, if we have not done so before, as the most dangerous Negro of the future of this nation from standpoint of communism, the Negro, and national security. And that is when the efforts to take down Martin Luther King started. The FBI started harassing him all the time, sending tapes to his house. In fact,
and
one
they just trying to make everybody
which included a letter that he believes and his whole team believes, and I believe, is from the FBI. I'm going to put the letter on the screen. This is the real letter. In the letter it says, you know you were a complete fraud and a giant liability to all of us Negroes. So whoever was writing this was trying to make it sound like it came from one of his black supporters. But in the letter, it's threatened him and said that you have to kill yourself. You have 34 days to do this.
34?
You are done. There's one way out for you. Better take it before your filthy, abnormal, fraudulent self is barred to the nation. They were threatening him to kill himself. And all of his team came to that conclusion at the time. His wife thought that. His whole family thought that. And it was basically saying, if you don't kill yourself, we're going to kill you. So you might as well go out with some dignity. And the government was so afraid of him that J. Edgar Hoover actually listed him as the most dangerous man in America. Martin Luther King, a civil rights activist who inspired thousands and made way for social justice reform in this country, was the most dangerous man in America? Dangerous to what? To how things are? To spreading the truth? Very interesting how people who speak against things like this or speak against violence, JFK, Gandhi, John Lennon, for example,
non-violent.
So like Martin Luther King was literally considered an enemy of the state. How many people knew that? And nowadays we have, you know, his memorial. This is an enemy, the largest enemy of the country, the biggest threat to America. And we have a full memorial in Washington, D.C. There's schools, roads, you name it, libraries named after him. And no one recognizes that he was listed as the most dangerous man in America. I mean, come on, people, it's time to wake up. J. Edgar Hoover obviously was afraid of him. The Kennedy brothers were also afraid of him, and I'll leave some sources so you can explore that a little further. But Basically, they were worried that the Communist Party had infiltrated his civil rights movement, and they were very afraid of communism. So, in 1967, Martin Luther King gave a speech on April 4th, exactly 1 year before he was killed. And he gave a speech that day titled, "Beyond Vietnam, Time to Break Silence." And I'm going to leave the whole speech so you can read it below, but I want to point out one specific part of it. My third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of my experience in the ghettos of the North over the last 3 years. Especially the last 3 summers. I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men. I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problem. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningfully through non-violent action. Most dangerous man in America. But they ask, and rightfully so, what about Vietnam? They ask if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home, and I knew I could never again raise my voice against violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. This was a big problem, and I think that speech, exactly 1 year before he assassinated, was the triggering point that led to the entire assassination. He constantly warned about how we were going.
So were they like saying all that shit, like the stuff about him being most violent, whatever?
That's crazy.
So that people didn't try and listen to him anymore because he was calling out the government?
I'm not.
Like, is that what she's getting at? Like,
see,
he was calling out the government, and so the government was like, no, don't listen to him. He is the most dangerous man in the world. Like,
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm.
And then he like kept going, so they killed him essentially.
Basically, yeah.
And then
they didn't.
After the court case that she talked about at the beginning.
Yeah,
and the government was, I guess, found guilty for conspiracy. That's why we don't hear about it.
I'm not sure. The government's corrupt. That's why we don't hear about it.
To lose our democracy if we did not solve 3 things: racism, poverty, and militarism. Now, when Martin Luther King was shot, he was in Memphis, Tennessee, and he was actually he was there specifically to help protest with the sanitation workers who were currently on strike. He was going to march with them and be part of their movement, and it was because he was working on something. His last project he ever worked on was the Poor People's Campaign.
I am convinced
I thought he got shot after
we
his speech.
can have here and in Washington a massive nonviolent campaign.
He was staying at a motel called the Lorraine, and that is
Oh, that's
actually
right.
where he
Yeah.
was murdered.
There were 4 tactical units composed of
Didn't they like light his house on fire?
with 3
That was before, yeah.
Before?
Yeah.
Like a
That
bomb
was
or something?
all kinds of shit, yeah.
and to prevent what the Memphis police thought would be a riot emanating from
I mean,
the
this
Lorraine
has nothing
Motel.
to really do with the video, but like when he was
Within a 5-block
younger, he tried to commit suicide a few times.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. So I knew he suffered from severe
Didn't
depression. But
somebody like... Somebody tried to blow him up in the church, right?
I don't know. I know
sure,
he's
'cause there was
been
little
tried
kids
to
that
attack.
died
I know
when
they've
they were-
thrown rocks through his windows and threatened his family and house on fire, all sorts of stuff, man. Yeah.
Radius of the Lorraine Motel.
One of the last calls he made before he died was to his church. He said he was going to be giving a sermon and wanted to tell them what it was about. His last sermon was called, and I'm not kidding, you can look this up, "Why America May Go to Hell." He had planned to touch more on militarism, racism, and poverty in the country and how the government wasn't doing nearly enough to help its people. So April 4th of 1968,
government
in the
probably
evening,
hired, I don't
Martin
know,
Luther King
hired
was
eight
standing
men.
out on the balcony of his motel. And this is where he was shot. He was shot in the cheek, into his jaw, through his neck. It severed his spinal cord and stopped at about his shoulder blade.
People point toward the spot where they think the shot originated. Bessie Brewer's rooming house, about 200 feet
I
away.
thought he
His
shot him
friend and
close.
fellow
Damn.
civil rights leader Ralph Abernathy was with him and held his head, trying to keep him possibly alive. And there are many reports that
That's
he
a
was
shame,
still
man.
alive even when he got to the hospital. He was taken to St. Joseph's, the hospital, and they worked to try to save his life. They attempted emergency surgery, but he was sadly pronounced dead at 7:05 at 39 years old.
Direct from our newsroom in Washington, in color, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. Dr. Martin Luther King, the apostle of nonviolence in the civil rights movement, has been shot to death in Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay, he doesn't act like he even cared.
Points a finger at local law enforcement.
That's a big deal, man.
150 police in the area, and they didn't see anybody.
Now, the impact that Martin Luther King's death created was insane. Like, America went wild. There were major riots, outbreaks of looting, arson. People were going nuts. It happened in over 100 cities in the country, and there was so much property damage and violence, and people were so angry, which Martin Luther King would not have wanted that, because he was all about nonviolent protest. He took a lot of his inspiration from Gandhi. But anyway, an additional 43 men and women were killed in riots. Approximately 3,500 were injured, and 27,000 people were arrested. Literally, the government had to bring in 58,000 National Guardsmen and Army troops to help.
We have room for 27,000 people?
There was an Alpha 184 Special Forces team in Memphis on the day, and no one knows what they were doing there.
The 20th Special Forces Group was shown to have a sniper team at the location of King's murder. This is a significant development because snipers are good at putting bullets through things from a large distance away.
It is said that the United States experienced their greatest wave of social unrest since the Civil War.
The next day, the government tries to quell talk of a conspiracy.
The evidence at this time indicates that it was the act of a single individual.
Now, the man that apparently killed Martin
I've never really seen all this stuff, so it's kind of
a single assassin, a racist. That would then say
in depth. I mean, that's what I'm seeing. Like like the in depth more. Like I knew.
His first conviction for criminal activity was a burglary in California, and that was in 1949. In 1952, he served 2 years for the armed robbery of a taxi driver in Illinois. In 1955, he was convicted of mail fraud after stealing money orders in Missouri. In 1959, he was caught stealing $120 in an armed robbery of a St. Louis Kroger store. And he actually escaped from prison. He was actually not arrested for this
$120 back in the day was a lot.
This happened April 4th. So over 2 months later, they finally arrest James Earl Ray, who said he was innocent. And there were fingerprints on binoculars in the room and a rifle. Now, we definitely know there is a extensive history of misuse of fingerprints and fraud. I mean, if you don't know, look it up. It's insane. And he would not confess to his crime. He maintained that he was innocent.
After negotiating to avoid a potential death sentence, James Earl Ray pleads guilty to murder and receives a 99-year sentence. But soon, Ray will recant, claiming his attorney coerced him to confess.
And it wasn't until March 10th of 1969 that he finally confessed in a plea. And this was called an Alford plea, and I'm going to let Judge Joe Brown explain this better than I can.
All through the transcripts, the entirety of the record, he never confessed, and often he said, I never said I killed King. I didn't kill him. I'm pleading cause of Alford. That's A-L-F-O-R-D. It's a moderately old U.S. Supreme Court case, and it says, even if you are not actually guilty and you are pristinely innocent, you may plead guilty to the charge if you think that doing so is in your best interest under all of the circumstances as you know them to be, and you're doing so freely, voluntarily, understandingly, knowingly, advisedly, and intelligently.
And till the day that James Earl Ray died, he maintained that he did not have anything to do with the assassination of Martin Luther King.
I did not shoot Martin Luther King Jr., and if I would have had a lawyer to represent me, I could have offered conclusive proof in support of this denial.
So many people don't know this, but Coretta Scott King and her family believed that this was FBI. They believed that James Earl Ray was not guilty, and they fought for a long time to prove that he was not the one who assassinated Martin Luther King.
And that shit's in history books.
Yeah.
Even though it's still...
I don't know.
Asks Ray if he killed his father. James Earl Ray responds with a simple, no, I didn't. Afterwards, Dexter King announces,
why would we still put that in the history books?
my family.
So legit, the government probably fucking did it, huh?
Trial. A real civil trial in this country.
That's so
not some
believable,
random
though.
trial in
Like,
someone's
back in that
basement.
time
This is a
period.
real trial. You didn't hear about it because our media is bullshit. That's why. And this was a wrongful death lawsuit from the King family against Mr. Jowers and co-conspirators. And Mr. Jowers was the man that ran the restaurant across the street called Jim's. And Judge Joe Brown made an amazing explanation for why he believes the gun could not have been the gun that was used by James Earl Ray.
The thing the state relied upon was the rifle, but modern scientific methodology excluded that rifle from being the murder weapon. The bullet they pull out of King's body has a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 11 1/4 inches. The rifle that Ray had a rate of rifling twist of 1 turn in every 10 inches and a bad manufacturing defect that is not apparent on the death slug.
And one thing that's really interesting, if you look at
Do you
the picture
understand
when
that?
Martin Luther King was killed,
I was just like, nodding a little bit. I don't really know.
20th Special Forces Group was shown to have a sniper team at the location of King's murder. This is a significant development because snipers are good at putting bullets through things from a large distance away.
There was so much inconsistency with the gun. And after 4 weeks of testimony, 12 jurors in only an hour came to the conclusion that Martin Luther King was killed in some type of conspiracy by the United States and different agencies, including Mr. Jowers.
15 years ago, the only trial ever held concerning the murder of Martin Luther King Jr. was concluded. In a civil trial in 1999, a jury found U.S. government agencies, along with others, guilty of assassinating MLK in Memphis in 1968. After hearing from 70 witnesses, including Lloyd Jowers, who assisted the sniper and owned Jim's Grill, the jury took less than an hour to decide that, 1, government agencies were responsible for the murder. 2, James Earl Ray, the man we've always been told pulled the trigger, had nothing to do with it.
What in the...
Lloyd Jowers, the former Memphis restaurant owner who in 1993 admitted he had a role in the conspiracy to kill King, is too ill to testify, so the trial takes place without him.
He said, the mafia-associated Memphis produce dealer named Frank Liberto gave him $100,000 to hire a hitman to kill King. Jowers said that he stored the actual assassination rifle in his restaurant, retrieving it from the real killer. And Jowers also said that he was visited the day before the murder by a man named Raul, who brought a rifle inside a box. And this was all in a real court case.
Our government, our own damn government, was found guilty in a court of law of straight up murdering a peaceful disobedience icon. Even if you're one of those people who want to go, it was a civil trial, that doesn't matter at all. Does that mean we're not entitled to hear about it and make our own decision?
And I want to read you the statement given after the final verdict came back.
Are you kidding me?
How did that not make news everywhere?
I didn't know that.
High-level conspiracy.
Did you?
And the assassination of my husband, Martin Luther King Jr. And the civil court's unanimous verdict has validated our belief. I wholeheartedly applaud the verdict of the jury, and I feel that justice has been well served in their deliberations. This verdict is not only a great victory for my family, but also a great victory for America. This victory is for truth itself. The jury was clearly convinced by the extensive evidence that was presented during the trial that in addition to Mr. Jowers, the conspiracy of the mafia, local, state, and federal government agencies were deeply involved in the assassination of my husband. I think it's also important to note that this jury was made up equally of white people and black people.
You never see
races.
that.
So this was not a slam dunk
No,
case
you
by
don't.
any means. And if you want to know more about this trial, if you're just as shocked as I was when you found out about it, I'm going to leave a ton of sources below. So at the end of the day, I don't know who killed Martin Luther King, but I certainly don't think it was James Earl Ray. He died in prison until the day that he died. He maintained that he did not do it.
It'll be there for historians and scholars.
Why'd he stay in
as far as
prison
we're
if there
concerned,
was a
James Earl
case?
Ray's name has been cleared.
Well,
Just because it was
I don't know.
civil?
Sometimes, yeah. So,
Because he has
yeah.
so much criminal record and history that would make it more believable. I truly believe that the true story of Martin Luther King's assassination has never been told to us, that we get half-truths about pretty much everything. And if you've been watching this channel for a while, maybe you're starting to realize just how untrue our history books are, you know? I mean, the version we get from the media is the biggest problem that we have. It's our biggest issue because people believe the media wholeheartedly.
Oh, for sure.
They're trained to believe
we see stuff from the news, and that's fact. That's what we know.
And that's a problem because that is exactly how they want this set up. So I'm not sure who killed Martin Luther King. It could have been James Earl Ray. I don't know if it's the mafia, the CIA, the FBI, or a mixture of all of them. I mean, who really knows? But I'd love to know your thoughts. Remember, at the end of the day, it is just a theory, although this was proven in court. But it's just a theory, so I want to know your thoughts on it. I want to know what you think and any additional information that you have. There is so much information on this, but that's it for me today, guys.
Alright, well, yeah, that doesn't surprise me because our school used to teach us about Christopher Columbus and how he was the first one to discover America, and they never really went into detail about how he basically was a murderer and all that. But what do you think Martin Luther King would think today? Like, you think he'd be happy about what's going on?
I just think it's crazy because, like, obviously, like, King has, like, legacies down. Like, he has, like, grandchildren. Like, just the other day, during the March for Our Lives, what was it, his great-granddaughter, whatever, or just granddaughter, she spoke at March for Our Lives. Like, why aren't people saying that what we see in the history books is not right?
I don't know. There's a lot of things in history that we're not taught properly about and taught the wrong things. But, well, that's it for today. Thanks for watching. The original link will be in the description below.